Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 549 for August 28th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week, everybody. On this episode, we will be diving into Fortnite and giving a
commentary,
a deep dive, a commentary on all of
playthrough, a walkthrough,
Yeah.
and a vocal commentary over top of that.
Exactly. If I was ever to do a podcast that would get my son to listen, that would be what it would have to be. It would take that for him to tune into one of these episodes. Because he is addicted. That is his game of choice at the moment.
Jeez.
However, it was funny. I did take him to go see Gran Turismo. We'll have a podcast review of that coming out soon. And obviously that is going to be the inspiration for some of the content on this week's show.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because there are those early scenes that you see in the trailer where, you know, the character is playing Gran Turismo on PlayStation, and
yeah,
you know, you see him driving and having a lot of fun, and
he owns all the Gran Turismo games 1 through 6, I guess, at that point.
Yes.
Or something. Yeah, you actually see the collection on his shelf.
You do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, Sam leans over to me and goes, "Dad, we should get the Gran Turismo set up for the PlayStation." And I just laughed at him. I was like, "Yeah, okay, sure."
So I guess I have to keep my eyes and ears open that in like 10 or 20 years from now, Sam is trying out for the GT Academy.
Yeah, who knows, you know, but it's just funny. Like, that is, you know, because often you go to these movies or you see these movies and you know that in some way that they are going to be a marketing tool of sorts.
Oh, yeah.
And you have this PlayStation game where PlayStation logos are slapped all over the movie.
PlayStation Productions. Yep. It's all. Yeah.
Yeah. An actual PlayStation, the games, as you noted in the first 10 minutes of the movie. So it is in many ways a PlayStation ad, and not even 15 minutes in, my son's like, "Yes, we have to get this game in the setup." So it was effective. It did its job.
Which begs the question with regard to Gran Turismo. Maybe we can talk more about this on the actual review of that movie. Does this really qualify as a video game adaptation?
I would say it's more of a biopic.
I mean, it is a true story in its own way. It just happens to be a movie about a video game that exists in the real world that helped fuel that true story, but it's not an adaptation.
Mm-hmm. No,
which is interesting.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think that's where, I guess, stinking Sony gets to have its cake and eat it too, right?
Right, yeah.
Because there is this true-to-life story that just happens to involve another one of their products. So,
yeah.
You know, it's one of those things where, you know, their market, like, I don't know how this wasn't made into a movie earlier. Like, hey, there's this guy in real life who played these games and he wanted to be a racer, and it's this inspirational story. Why didn't we make this yesterday? So, you know, it is interesting in that regard.
That's true. I mean, they had over 10 years to do it, because didn't this all happen in like 2011 or something?
Something like that, or at least it began around that time. So maybe they needed some space to let that play out.
Yeah.
And, you know, so they've been writing it and getting it in pre-production and all that sort of stuff. I don't really know the behind the scenes on the film, but
no.
It really does play out more as a biopic. It just happens to be about a guy who played video games and was inspired to channel that into something more tangible.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be a video game. So, I mean, it could have really been any product, really. So
instead of punching meat in a freezer like Rocky did, he's sitting down playing a video game. That's his training montage.
I mean, it really is the kind of story that every mega corporation is just waiting to hear, right? Next year, we're going to get the story of the guy who was obsessed with Coca-Cola and had 18 cans a day and then channeled that into becoming president. Who knows? I don't know.
Developed so much energy, he was able to run the Boston Marathon.
Exactly. That's a better example. So, that's what they're waiting on, right? So we need the InSession film. That's what we've got to figure something out there.
Earth was a little bit crazier. I don't think it's quite interesting for Sony to think about.
Absolutely. At any rate, that is to say that on this episode, we're going to channel something that we actually did some time ago. I believe it was episode 179. Does
2016,
right?
I think it was. I know it was in conjunction with the Warcraft episode.
Yes, it was in conjunction with the Warcraft episode. I think I might have it pulled up here. No, I don't. Hold on. I'd have to look it up later. At any rate, you are correct. It is the Warcraft episode. We talked about our top 3 video games that we would like to see as films. But obviously that was 2016 when that film came out. So
that was 7 years ago, dude.
It's been quite a while. There's been several video games that come out since then. I don't know if people know this or not, but video games have been released since then. There's been a lot of talk. Yep. We've even seen some media films and TV shows based off video games over the last few years. So
some that were pretty predictive, at least on your side.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I was going to say, I knew you were. That's why I'm being a little bit vague about whatever that context is.
Yeah, we'll get to that later in the show, but we're going to revisit that topic. We're not necessarily going to do a list, but we'll have a loose conversation about some video games that we would like to see as films. So with that, though, before we get there, there's a few other topics that we needed to get to. One, we have an announcement to make. It's going to be exciting. Everyone mark your calendars. At the end of September, Brennan and I are going to be doing our 2001 retrospective.
About time.
We typically do these actually right now, like the last show of August.
Yeah, it's usually end of August. Yeah.
It's usually this episode. But, we're a little bit behind. It's been a busy year. There's been lots of changes to the show. So we decided to hold off for another month.
Yeah.
And at the end of September, we will be diving into that 2001 retrospective. So do your homework. Any rewatches you need to get out of your system, and be prepared for that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
There's a lot that I'm looking forward to here. And this is a stacked year. We say this a lot, JD, but I think this year, especially 2001, is a stacked year.
Yeah. It's surprisingly so.
Yeah. I mean, we go by, we sometimes reference letterbox grading as a way to sort of represent how much we love these movies in a certain year. I wouldn't be surprised if I have at least 15 movies from this year that I would give a full 5 out of 5 stars to. Yeah.
I'm probably right there with you. And,
and I don't give that grade out very, very much.
I don't either. I don't either. I am very sparingly using the 5 stars.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when I first started doing my homework for this a few months ago, I had written out a few films that I knew I had seen that would crack my list in some sort of way. But the more I kept doing research and the more I realized what had actually come out in 2001, because there was actually 2 films because of the weird release structure of foreign films and some indie films.
Yeah.
I wasn't exactly sure. I didn't associate them with 2001 in my mind. But then as we looked at them, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, this is a 2001 movie.
Yep.
And now I add that to my already very dense list in terms of my top 10 anyway. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what a year for that 10 might be the best 10 that we've done in these retrospectives on quite some time.
Over under.
Since 2007, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Over under, how many crossovers do you think we're going to have?
Oh, boy. In the top 5, I would say at least 2.
That's what I'm saying.
Maybe
2.
3.
I'm thinking more of the top 10 because that's more of a the top 10 seems to represent the final statement that a person gives you to represent how good a year was. So if we look at the top 10, the most that I think we've ever had as crossovers was 2004, where we had 8 movies that crossed over.
Did we really have 8?
We had 8.
That much?
Remember, we sort of copied the whole film spotting technique where we did our outliers first, and then we did our crossovers and just kind of went back and forth.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, because we had 8 crossovers. That was the year of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, The Incredibles. I think our outliers were I think I had The Life Aquatic, and you had, I forget what you had as one of your outliers, but we had a lot of crossovers on that particular episode.
Yeah,
I don't think it'll be quite that much here for 2001. Okay. I'm guessing maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah, looking at my 2004 list here, I do recall what you're saying. Where we would have had a lot of crossover there.
We should have just did a joint list that year.
I know. Well, I guess in some ways we
kind of did.
Yeah. Looking at this list now, if we're looking beyond the 5 and looking at the 10, I think there's at least 5 remote crossover, at least.
If we end up having like 3 or 4, I would say someone's lying.
Yeah, no, I can virtually guarantee. So again, I'm being vague here, so listeners don't know what I'm looking at, but I'm looking at my list of my 10 as it stands. Obviously, I still have some more homework. This could change, but as it stands right now, and these two, the first 2 I'm looking at will not change. They will absolutely be on your list. There's a 3rd film I'm looking at here. Now, I don't know where in the top 10 it'll be, but it'll for sure be on your list. So there's at least 3 that I can virtually guarantee. The 4th on my list is really high for me. I don't know where it'll land for you, but I'm confident it'll still be in your 10.
Okay.
So there's those. And then looking at the rest of my list, there's 1, 2, 3 others that I can't say positively 100% they'll be on your list, but I'd almost be surprised.
I do surprise you every now and then, though. That's the fun part about it.
That is true. Brendan is full of surprises.
We're going to get to this. You're going to find out that a movie like Shallow Hal is my number 2.
That wouldn't surprise me if there is something.
Don't worry, people. It's not.
Yeah, Vanilla Sky somehow lands in his top 10. Like, those are the kind of surprises that he has.
We talked about this on our latest Patreon content, which for those of you listening, if you're not a Patreon yet, you should really sign up there and get some really fun content that we do before these episodes even begin. But we talked about how rewatches are going to be the most fun to do for this particular retrospective, and Vanilla Sky is a movie I haven't seen in so long. That is one I am really intrigued by to see if that one works even better for me now than it did when I first saw it, like almost 20 years ago.
I'm curious. I'm with you. It's not in my top 10. I don't foresee it being in my top 10, but I have not seen that film in 20 years, so who knows what a rewatch will do. But yeah, I will say this. There's at least 4 that will for sure cross over on.
Oh, yeah.
When it's all said and done, if we're closer to that 7 and 8 range, I also won't be surprised.
I wouldn't either. So we'll
see.
You know what 1 is, and I know it's going to be on your list.
Oh, yeah. No. It's, for sure.
Yeah.
No, like I said, there's 3 that I know 1,000% are on your list and in your top 5, not even just 10 that are in your 5.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So we'll see. Anyway, stay tuned. That is the end of September. We'll get to that. Before we get to video games, though, let's talk about the box office. It's been a big talking point this summer, and for good reason, because Barbie has broken all kinds of records. It recently just became Warner
It's a B movie. It's a B movie.
It's a B movie.
It's a literal B movie.
Crossed $1 billion. I don't believe we talked about that last week, but it crossed $1 billion. It's become Warner Brothers' highest grossing movie.
Yeah, since Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, I think.
Yeah, something like that. I think it's $1.3 billion worldwide as it stands. Just insane. That film is just continues to surprise and break all kinds of records, and I don't see that train slowing down anytime soon.
Oh, no.
When it's all said and done, I mean, it might break every Warner Brothers record they have.
I mean, when I went to go and see Gran Turismo this week, and it was on National Cinema Day on Sunday, and I went at like 8 a.m, and the place was still littered with people in pink.
Yeah,
it's so you're right. The Barbie train is still riding, and it's still riding strong. So this is we have to start seriously considering this movie as a player when it comes to award season. We really do. And we were talking about that already, but this is something that just can't be ignored. And whether you like the movie or not, you can't sit there and say that it's going to be ignored, because this is going to have legs. It really is going to have legs now because of this success.
I agree. No, I think it'll be a huge awards player.
Yeah.
Not only because of its box office success, but it's a really well-made movie. I think in terms of artistic craftsmanship, it should be in the conversation. And also, the caveat here, which will lead us to another segment here in a minute, there are movies that are being delayed, and at this point, we don't know which ones are staying and which ones are going. So by the time we get to the Oscars next spring, will there be anything for it to compete with Barbie aside from its partner in crime in Oppenheimer? I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, Warner Brothers is certainly predicting ahead of that. I guess that transitions a little bit into something we'll talk about later with a certain choice that was made regarding another one of their films. But yeah, you're right. There is the possibility that we're only going to see Barbenheimer. We're going to see Barbenheimer the sequel. Instead of the box office game, it's going to be the awards game.
The awards game, absolutely. Yeah. And I am reading this. Greta Gerwig's Barbie did officially become the highest grossing global release in Warner Brothers history.
Yep.
So
that's a big deal.
That's insane.
A big deal.
Absolutely
and
insane.
On the subject of Oppenheimer, you mentioned that.
Let's talk about it.
This is we talked about this. What was it? Maybe 2
last
weeks ago.
Week.
Was it last week?
Okay, last week.
The timing is getting all
I know
fuzzy
it
here.
all blurs together.
But we talked about Oppenheimer and the chances of it also being a $1 billion movie. The projections are saying what, like 950 million?
950. Yep.
You might as well call it a $1 billion movie at that
That's
point.
close enough.
You might as well.
This
is
close.
A 3-hour biopic that has 200 visual effect shots compared to Interstellar that had 700.
Yeah.
This is a nearly $1 billion movie.
It is absolutely wild. I mean, people joke about it being this movie where people talk in rooms for the majority of it. And look, they're not wrong. It's obviously more than that. It's Christopher Nolan, and the artistic craftsmanship is insane. We've all talked about it. We've all experienced it. But when you boil it down to its basics, a lot of this movie is just characters talking to each other in rooms. It is dramatically compelling. It's engrossing, obviously. But for a movie that is essentially talking heads, $1 billion? No one on this planet would have guessed that or even dreamt of that. That is wild. Absolutely insane.
This is a huge deal for not just movies like this, because it's so exciting to see movies like this succeed. And of course, it's going to be an awards player. We sort of know this now, right?
But it's Oppenheimer, and just give them both Best Picture.
Might as well just do it. Barbenheimer wins Best Picture.
Exactly. Look, if they did that, I would applaud the Academy. That's something that I
kind
think
of would
be
too.
brave
Yeah,
and incredible.
Yeah, I would too on that for sure. But this would also be a big deal for both Universal Pictures or Universal Studios, rather. Universal and Christopher Nolan as well. And I feel like Universal kind of needs this, if I'm not mistaken, because didn't they also distribute Green Book? So they're kind of clamoring for another. I think they're clamoring for another awards player, as it's been since Green Book won. That's 4 to 5 years, which isn't really a long time. But when you have these production companies almost working like monopolies that just battle each other out, another one needs to enter the race and actually have a compelling chance.
Yeah.
And you know how the Academy especially likes to reward talent, whether it be directors, writers, or actors for like career achievements. That's not to say Christopher Nolan is undeserving for Oppenheimer. In fact, he's probably most deserving than he ever has been before, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is the time to do that same thing.
This is the time to do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for this kind of movie to make $1 billion or come very close to $1 billion, that is utterly insane. And no one expected that. And you have to reward it, whether it be a Best Picture, which would be deserving. Best Director would be deserving. Cillian Murphy
would be deserving.
How
At
many
this
times
point,
has he been nominated for an Oscar? Not many, if any at all.
I don't think he has been.
I don't think he has been either. Robert Downey Jr., he hasn't been a major player when it comes to awards in a long time because obviously he's been Tony Stark over the last dozen years or so.
Although I think we sometimes forget he was nominated for Tropic Thunder.
Yes, a very different performance, right? Very different. And that was the same year as the first Iron Man, wasn't it? Was that 2008?
2008. Yeah, I think it was.
So, it's been a long time since he's been in a role like this. I think it would be deserving. I mean, heck, most of that cast would be deserving. And I guess this somewhat ties into another piece of news we want to talk about, because when it comes to the below the line categories, Oppenheimer was obviously going to be a favorite for a lot of them. Its major competition was going to be Dune, the sequel to Dune Part 2. And that has now been delayed for God knows what reason till March 15th. March 15th.
I mean, we know the reason.
Why?
It's an unfortunate reason.
Yeah, we do know why.
Yeah.
I'm being facetious, but
yeah. Well, it makes me think, and I saw someone make this comment on Twitter. Forgive me, I don't remember who it was, but with Warner Brothers making this move, they're either doing one of two things. They're clearing the way for Barbie because they know they have a potential sure thing, or do they also anticipate, because of the SAG and WGA strikes, will the Oscars get delayed too?
Well, that's interesting because we don't really have much information on that as it currently stands, but maybe they have some inside information that the public just isn't privy to yet. That certainly could be the case. You might be on to something there. However,
I can't take credit for it. Someone else tweeted that. So, but I thought it was
whoever made that observation,
I thought it was a pretty fair observation.
Very astute. I do agree. However, they've been marketing this film for quite some time.
Yeah.
And it's coming out near the end of the year. Award season is in full swing. We know that this is going to be an awards player of some sort. It seemed to be primed to do very well at the box office at that time as well.
Yeah.
It just made the perfect sense for it to come out, in November as it was slated to. And it's also interesting, ironic, maybe intentional, I don't know, but they make this news and the next day here's a massive marketing drop.
I was just going to bring this up. Literally the next day, it's plastered all over Empire, right?
Yeah.
It's just
insane.
like the timing of that is just, it's kind of hilarious. And
it is.
I don't know what the message is meant to say.
Like, if I was in charge of marketing at Warner Brothers, I wouldn't have liked that timing all that much. Maybe it was out of their hands. I don't really know. But that was Oppenheimer's competition when it comes to sound and production design and some of these below the line categories. Now that Dune isn't there, Oppenheimer will potentially sweep much of that. Now, we haven't seen David Fincher's new film. We haven't seen Scorsese's new film.
We haven't seen Rebel Moon's going to sweep it all.
Rebel Moon, the creator. There will be other films.
The creator is a very, very good one that could potentially sweep it.
I'm curious. I'm very curious and interested in that one for sure.
Yeah.
So we assume Oppenheimer will be a heavy favorite for those categories, but we don't really know. There might be another contender that comes along, but I don't think it's unfair to presume that Dune was going to be the other major horse in those races. So with that being gone, Oppenheimer will likely take many of those categories in addition to what they may take in the above the line categories. So it could be a huge, huge night for Oppenheimer, in addition to it making almost $1 billion. Maybe it crosses that $1 billion mark. And
I really hope it does, just to say officially that it is a $1 billion movie.
It would be
I think it has a chance.
Yeah.
I really do think it has a chance.
I agree. I mean, look, there's still, 4 more months till the end of the year. I don't think it's going to leave theaters at all, at least not anytime soon.
No, and if it doesn't make the $1 billion mark by the time it officially leaves theaters, they do this a lot, they being the studios, right? They'll re-release a movie in theaters for like a week or something like that, just to qualify for its Oscar run or to keep it top of mind for award season.
No, it'll definitely get re-released in a bigger way, whether it be the end of the year or those first few months, January, February, to get it back in people's minds and to get it fresh again as the Oscars nominations are coming out and everything that we see there. So I think this absolutely has a great chance to cross $1 billion. And also, it will get there, if not this year or the beginning of next year, as all these films tend to do. It will get re-released at a 5-year anniversary, a 10-year anniversary. One of these days, it will reach $1 billion. It's going to get too close that a re-release will definitely push it over the edge. It'll get there eventually, but I think it's going to happen in this cycle.
I think it will.
I think it could be anyway. It could get very, very close.
Yeah. We're dealing with two new classics on our hands right now. In very weird ways and unique circumstances for sure, but we've got 2 classics on our hands.
Yeah. Anyway,
and thankfully they're very good movies.
Both very good movies. Again, just give Barbenheimer Best Picture. Just give it to them both.
And then just give Best Director to whoever created the grassroots marketing campaign for it.
Exactly. Yeah. They deserve a ton of awards. That is for sure. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on Dune 2 before we move on?
No.
I mean, you alluded to, we really know the reason. This is a bargaining chip when it comes to negotiation.
It is. Yeah. I'll just simply say I was really looking forward to the movie because I liked Dune Part 1. I didn't love it, and it's mostly because I wasn't really ready to say I loved it because the story felt incomplete, right? Mm-hmm. But from what I know of Frank Herbert's original story, and especially what we could potentially get in Dune Messiah, if Denis Villeneuve is able to complete this trilogy, it really does start with Dune Part 2, at least this segment of the story that kind of starts to recontextualize this whole idea of the chosen one narrative, which we see so much nowadays. To see a movie that comes along and kind of shows the negative side of that, which is what I'm expecting this movie to do. Mm-hmm. I'm excited to see the movie. I really am. And it's unfortunate that we have to wait longer now.
I completely agree. I mean, I loved Dune Part 1. I thought it was fantastic. One of my favorite movies of the year. Its craft, the visuals of it all, the performances, Hans Zimmer's blistering score was fantastic. And I mean, it left us in this space of wanting more. And I've been extremely excited to see where Denis takes us with the rest of this. So, and maybe also because he's planning on hopefully concluding this as a trilogy.
Yeah.
So knowing that there might be a part 3 if this does well, I mean, I'm all for it. I want to see the Denis trilogy when it comes to this material. So, March 15th, I do think is a strange date. Maybe it's because they're expecting the Oscars to get pushed back.
Yeah.
I mean, the spring doesn't have a ton of other stuff that it might be competing against. But I don't know. It's such a weird time for a movie like that to drop.
Yeah.
You can't convince me that that's going to be better than if it came out in November. Am I crazy to think that? There's no way.
I don't think
I don't know. Mario Brothers did well, but that's a different story though. Like the context is so different.
That's an Illumination movie. It was going to be successful because kids.
Yeah. I hope they're not making this decision because of the success of Mario Brothers. I mean, goodness gracious.
I mean, we know they're dumb, but I don't know if they're that dumb.
They are. No, they definitely
are. They probably are.
Okay, let's talk about the next thing on our list here. The trailer for Rebel Moon. I know that you are so excited for this, Brendan. So tell me your thoughts on Zack Snyder's new film, Rebel Moon. What did you think of the trailer?
Can we make this a 30-second segment before we move on to something else?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I don't know. Trailers, whatever. The movie just looks like a Dune ripoff that you'd see a direct-to-video thing in Blockbuster. You remember you used to see all those knockoff sci-fi movies that were clearly ripoffs of classic movies, and it would say I don't know, like Jaws 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what this movie. That's what this felt like to me.
Wow. Okay.
Now then again, take this with a small grain of salt, I guess, because I'm not really the biggest Zack Snyder fan. I still think the 2 best movies he's ever done are Dawn of the Dead and The Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole, whatever it's called. I can't even remember the name, but I think it's one of his better movies.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I don't know. The trailer just reeked of familiarity in a way that felt kind of like the guy didn't really think he was trying to be familiar.
Well, that's where I find this hilarious. I wish that he would have dropped this before we did last week's episode, because this is a movie that will absolutely put that theory to the test.
Yes.
It's not what a movie is about, it's how it's about it. We talked about that so much. It's an ethos of the show. It's how we look at film criticism. I don't care what a movie is trying to do. I don't care what it's about. It's how it's about an execution. And I was thinking about that so heavily because we had just released that episode last week when this trailer dropped, and it was testing my patience. I'm not going to lie. I don't love Zack Snyder like a lot of other people do. I wasn't blown away by this trailer either. However, I do want to keep an open mind because
I'm trying
the same ideas we talked about last week. However, and I don't know if this is just more humorous than anything else. I don't really know, but Zack Snyder, God love him or hate him, who knows, but he is intensely brazen about wearing his influences. Like, he just does not care. Like, he introduces lightsabers into this movie and just doesn't care to make it any different. Like, these are Star Wars lightsabers. I don't care. I'm not trying to be different. That's what they are.
It makes me so mad, and I don't know if I should shake his hand or punch him in the face for that.
Well, and this is where I think maybe, and again, I'm presuming, and I will gladly change my tone if the film comes out and it's different than what I'm about to lay out here. But I think that's where, thinking about this film in execution, where it could become troublesome, because if in execution it is a Star Wars ripoff, if it is a Dune ripoff, which is what it seems to be, again, very brazenly, then I think it's very fair to criticize him even inside that ethos we talked about last week. So I'm simply waiting it out at this point. I want to see what it is, but if that's all this comes to be, is a visually interesting, at times, movie that is ultimately a Dune and Star Wars and even a little bit of Fury Road ripoff going on here, then I can't say that I'm going to
Rebel Blender.
I
mean, I guess the title is appropriate. I mean, I guess Snyder is a bit of a rebel in that regard.
He is a little bit of a rebel in that regard, but I mean, it's hard not to see the influences. He doesn't care. A lot of people ate it up, but like, it's going to take more than that to get me excited. When, like, it's one thing to take something like Star Wars or Dune that you love, and you want to reintroduce elements of those films, but you do it in a way that feels like it has its own identity. Movies do that all the time, and I have no problem with films or filmmakers that want to do that. My issue with Rebel Moon is that Zack Snyder isn't doing anything to create a new identity. It is Dune and Star Wars and lightsabers. There's nothing to identify itself from those two movies, at least based off this trailer.
Yeah, and also considering the full title of this movie, I don't know if you saw that. It's called Rebel Moon Part 1. But then there's also a subtitle there called A Child of Fire. So it's doing similar things.
Yeah, so that's where in execution I might find this film, leaving a lot to be desired, because as it is, the Star Wars lightsabers in the trailer doesn't get me excited, because like, if you want to reintroduce that in a different way, that's fine. I'm okay with that. But he didn't do that. He just stole them. Flat out stole them.
It makes me think, would I react any differently to this trailer if it weren't a Zack Snyder film? Would I actually be a bit more agitated by it? But knowing that it is Zack Snyder, who wears his influences so brazenly on his sleeve to the point of frustration, does that make it more tolerable, or does that even make me angrier? Like, I don't even know.
I kind of admire it in some ways, like to be so direct with it, like, and maybe it's the trailer and how it's trying to tap into the momentum that that was Dune, that's been Star Wars over the decades, because this trailer makes it seem like it is Dune, like this is a Dune movie.
The thing that worries me the most,
it's
no hiding, but the thing that worries me the most, to get even further away from the influences that Snyder is clearly riffing on, the big thing that I didn't like about his last movie, Army of the Dead, which I still stand by as my least favorite Zack Snyder film, it was the fact that Snyder was also the cinematographer. I just did not think that was a very good looking movie. I at least applauded his attempt at doing some unique things with the camera, as far as the camera choice that he was using, the camera itself, but it didn't yield a very palatable product. And it's not supposed to be palatable, but it's an ugly film in the wrong ways. And I'm kind of getting similar vibes from Rebel Moon, also knowing that he is acting as cinematographer once
again.
He
is the cinematographer.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I just don't think he should be doing that. It's like some directors work best when they don't write their own scripts. In his case, he's not at his best when he shoots his own movies at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, and maybe he shouldn't write. I don't really know. I know he's part of the
we know he
team
shouldn't
here.
write. We already know that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's maybe where I'm a little frustrated, because I do think there is, at least at times in his movies, there is a visual intuitiveness that I can admire in a vacuum. However, I do think that he loses himself in that too often as a storyteller.
I agree.
And in this case for Rebel Moon, he's not doing anything to distinct himself. This is placing the camera in a way that might evoke some alluring imagery.
Yeah.
That, again, on its own terms might be compelling, but in the context of a movie that has lore that is so, that, again, it's not even just, it's an influence, it is stolen.
Yeah,
it is
true.
flat
that's
out
true.
stolen. There's nothing that I saw in this trailer that is distinctive, that takes an idea and reinvigorates it in a new way, as a good filmmaker should do. That's not what he's just flat out stealing.
Yeah.
And it's hard. So it's hard for me to get excited.
I'm with you. I just went on Google and Googled Dune ripoff movies. I'm looking at some of these posters like Dune Drifter and Planet Dune. And it's like, yeah, this is giving me Rebel Moon vibes. It really is.
Okay. I mean, I'll keep an open mind, but we'll see. We'll definitely see.
I'll try as well. I really will.
All right, Brennan, it's time to talk about coffee, our favorite drink in the world.
We really got to stop doing these plugs at like 11 p.m. when we should not be drinking coffee, because all I want is coffee right now. Look, and I got some great coffee in the mail. Thanks to you.
Absolutely. I hope you're enjoying that delicious Colombian IPE. It's fantastic. Do love me some Colombian IPE. What's great about Coffee Call is that they source only specialty grade coffee. Yeah. You know, they don't use anything to degrade the beans at all. It's all high-end gourmet coffee. One of their newest is the Colombian IPE that Brennan is talking about. And this is a coffee that, without hyperbole, it tastes like blueberries, like strawberries.
I know.
Notes of peach. It is incredibly delicious. Like, this is a coffee that you don't need milk and sugar for this.
Nope.
It is wonderful on its own, because there are coffee companies out there where, and you see this all the time, especially this time of year. And look, I'm going to get a little pretentious here for a moment.
Hey, you have every right to. You're a coffee boy.
I saw tweets from people that I admire and respect going to coffee companies, to coffee places, and talking about these milk and sugar drinks that involve pumpkins and spices. And I'm here to tell you to stop it. To stop. You don't need a ton of milk and sugar and nonsense in your coffee. If you're getting vanilla and chocolate and caramel and all kinds of you're not drinking coffee anymore. You're drinking milk and sugar. And it's costing you $10
drinking a milkshake by that point.
It is a milkshake, especially if you get a frappe. Frappes are milkshakes. It is not coffee. Those are dessert drinks that are not good.
Yeah.
Not good. So the great thing about Coffee Cult is that it can give you those sweet flavors, like a Colombian IPE. It is delicious. It is natural flavors in the coffee. And again, it's like drinking like a strawberry shortcake. That's what it tastes like.
That description is honestly kind of apt.
It's so good.
It's the most ridiculous thing to call coffee is strawberry shortcake tasting. But it works. It works.
It's fantastic stuff. You know, this is coffee that is roasted to order. So it's not just sitting in some warehouse. They wait for you to order. Then they roast and ship it off to you. Nothing is stale. It's extremely fresh. It's true, delicious, specialty grade coffee. So
ethically sourced too. I'm not sure if it was mentioned about how they treat their workers very well too, especially women.
Yeah, that is very important to them as well. So that's coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. Use our code and get 15% off. 15% off with the code ISF. Again, that code is ISF, and you'll get 15% off at coffeecult.com. All right, Brendan, it's time to podcast.
It is.
Or talk about podcasting, which is what we're doing right now.
But we have a great platform. We have a great hosting platform, and we couldn't do it without Libsyn. Could not do it without them.
Yeah, we've been using Libsyn since the beginning in 2013.
Yep.
They're fantastic. We absolutely love them. This is a podcasting service that currently hosts over 75,000 podcasts worldwide. Oof. They are a combination of liberated and syndication. They're wonderful. They have a platform that not only allows you to upload your show seamlessly.
Yep.
They have a system that branches it out everywhere, so you don't have to upload it to all these various podcasting platforms.
Yep.
Their analytics and statistics is fantastic. Social media engagement, like they help you optimize everything with extreme efficiency.
Honestly, I the fact that we've grown as well as we have over the past 10 years, we have to thank the analytics from Libsyn, I think, on that. Like it's just been so easy to track and deciphering what trends we need to focus on. And that's something you need. Like you have to treat this, whatever podcast you want to form, you have to treat it like a business. You got to look at it from a marketing perspective, and Libsyn makes it so easy for you.
Absolutely. And whether you want to treat it that way as a way to market, to better your show, or just simply do it for fun, regardless of how you want to treat it. If you want to get into podcasting, it's a lot of fun. We love doing this every single week. Check out Libsyn. That's Libsyn. Libsyn.com. If you sign up, you'll get 2 months free when you use our code ISF. That's 2 months free when you use our code ISF. Sign up today. That's Libsyn, Libsyn, Libsyn.com. All right. With that, shall we get into video games and movies?
Yes. Yeah, let's give that a go. Let's talk about some video games.
Let's talk about that. Again, I want to say it was episode 179. We talked about this briefly. We did a top 3 video games that we would like to see adapted into film.
Yeah.
Now, since then, well, I guess first let me read off our list.
Okay.
Some of these movies might come up. At number 3 for me, I had this little-known video game called The Last of Us.
Predictive.
Which is hilarious. I didn't even realize this until Brennan brought it to my attention earlier in the week that The Last of Us was my number 3. I went back and listened to this segment.
Yeah.
And I sent you a clip of it as well. So
you did.
You could have some context here. When I was talking about The Last of Us, again, this is 2016, right? I was so enthusiastic about the potential of a Last of Us film. Obviously, it came to us in the form of a TV series instead of a film. But at the time, I was so elated about the idea of a film adaptation of this video game series because it's, it's a zombie game at its core. And I certainly am, I'm not opposed to being in a post-apocalyptic world where zombies are involved. I'm definitely there for that. It has this father-daughter dynamic at play, even though they're not blood related, but there's some sort of redemption. There's everything that happens in the opening, of the game between a real father and daughter. And at the time I had not played the game, and spoiler alert, still haven't played The Last of Us.
We're going to make that caveat a few times here. I think.
For sure. However, I bring all that up to say that while this was not top of mind for me when the series came out, was that just earlier this year that came out?
I think so.
I think so. I think that was just earlier this year. It came out, and I was not. I didn't like it. Honestly, Brandon, I was not a fan.
Yeah, I was kind of with you. I liked pockets of it. The third episode with Nick Offerman, I thought was great.
Oh my gosh, that's one of the best episodes of television I've maybe ever seen.
Yeah,
that. That episode was incredible.
Yeah, but the season that we saw, I think it works better in pockets. I think it worked better when certain episodes function more like their own short stories. As opposed to an overarching series.
And I think that's it. Like from episode to episode, there was a lot to appreciate that I really liked. I loved the performances. The performances were really great. The production design I thought was very good. I just don't think as a broader vehicle in terms of establishing lore and continuing to establish, like they establish lore that gets mostly forgotten and until it comes back for convenience sake. And I just think there's a lot that happens within that first season that it was too uneven and emotionally distant for me. And that's the big thing. As much as I love the performances, because everything I had heard when I brought this up in 2016, oh my gosh, you're going to be emotionally obliterated by this film or this series, whatever they turn it into, the game, even if you go and play it.
Yeah.
And I mean, on the surface, I was like, everything everyone told me about it, prepare yourself, you're going to be a mess. And then I watched the series and I don't, there has to be some credence to what I'm saying because I'm still as emotional now as I've ever been. I joked about this earlier in the Patreon exclusive. I sent Brendan a thing earlier today because I'm reading, I just finished reading The Half-Blood Prince, the Harry Potter book, and now I'm reading Deathly Hallows for the first time. And I get to that part where Hedwig dies and, there's a comment about Harry and him reflecting on it. And I send this to Brendan.
Oh, with with not emojis. Just one, but 3 cry emojis.
So look, I'm just as emotional now as I've ever been. I got 2 kids now. So if anything, I'm double what I was in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely.
And The Last of Us show just did not connect with me emotionally at all.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I like the production value of it. I think it's a well-made show.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And look, I know a lot of people loved it. I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. It just did not work for me. And maybe that's the difference between experiencing the game and not experiencing it because I never did play it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And that makes for an interesting, not just an interesting conversation in its own right, but also for this particular conversation we're about to have because you and I are not really big gamers. I guess we'll kind of admit that, right? I mean, I think
I'm not a huge gamer in the sense of like these narrative cinematic games. Ironically, you know what I play mostly, Brendan? NHL 24. That's what I play.
Yeah. So I guess that's when I say gamer, I guess I'm more referring to maybe that particular
like this
realm
type of game.
Yeah. I most of the video games that we're going to talk about here. Some of them, I'll admit, I haven't even played, but I know enough about their narratives because I've seen other people play them, and I think that would make a good movie.
Sure,
So there is maybe a little bit of naivete coming into this conversation, but I do think it's appropriate to introduce this naivete with regard to The Last of Us because we haven't played the game. maybe playing the game would have helped our enjoyment of the show and
It's
filled in some
possible,
of those
yeah.
gaps. I don't know, because when you're playing a game that narratively might feel a little incomplete, somehow you projecting yourself into that conflict helps fill in those gaps. It's like this weird relationship you develop with it. And maybe that's something that would have helped us there.
I agree. And I can certainly understand that, because another thing I noted in our Patreon exclusive this week, again, patreon.com/InSessionFilm, if you want to sign up and go and listen to that, because we talked about the first 2 episodes of Ahsoka. Yeah. And I love the first 2 episodes, and part of it is because I have experience with that character. I have experience with her, not just in Clone Wars, but in Rebels. I have experience with the Rebels characters, which we're now seeing
also
in
her live action introduction in Mandalorian, right?
100%. So as a result, I do feel like I'm like maybe a step ahead of those that haven't experienced Ahsoka, that haven't seen the Clone Wars, that haven't seen Rebels, where they might have more work to do to understand who these characters are. I know them. So when I see Rosario Dawson as live action Ahsoka with her arms folded and these long pauses, that's not a criticism to me. That's the character. That's Ahsoka Tano. That's who she is. And so I can see how that could be a disconnect if you've never seen Ahsoka before. Right. Yeah. And maybe there's elements of that with The Last of Us where I just can't connect with it like those that have played the game. And maybe that's where that disparity comes from. I don't know, but I could see that being the case for sure.
Well, that was a very long-winded way of saying in 2016 you had The Last of Us at your number 3.
Yes, I did. And then I also had Mass Effect and The Legend of Zelda, which you also had on your list, was The Legend of
Zelda.
Of Zelda. Is that something that you still would like to see? Now, we picked that for very different reasons, honestly.
Yeah.
Is that something you would still like to see, though, regardless?
In the right way. Yes, I would love to see it in the right way. And when I say the right way, I mostly mean Illumination, don't touch it. That's mostly what I mean. After the success of Super Mario Brothers, I have heard rumblings that Illumination is very interested in the Zelda property. And
we talked about that earlier in the year, I think.
We did, yeah. Briefly. So this could be white noise for any active listeners of the show who may remember this conversation. Yeah. I just don't think the lore and the mythology of Zelda goes hand in hand with Illumination sensibilities. I understood, I didn't love the Super Mario Brothers movie, but I understood why Illumination wanted to make it, because it actually does fit in their tonal and aesthetic wheelhouse. Like it makes sense. I just wish it was more of a Mario movie as opposed to just being an Illumination movie that featured Mario Brothers, right?
Yes.
But it does fit their wheelhouse. Zelda, I don't think does. Now, I would still love to see a Zelda property, perhaps a movie in some form. I'm trying to recall when we did that top 3 back in 2016. I was pretty adamant that if you're going to do a Zelda movie, you specifically adapt the N64 game Ocarina of Time, which I don't know if I would agree with myself on that anymore. I think with regard to that, if you know the story of Ocarina of Time, part of the charm of that story is that it features our hero of time, Link, but it features him in 2 different timelines. He goes back and forth in a 7-year period. So I was kind of thinking of the Richard Linklater effect. Like, what if you got the same actors to play a role and then waited 7 years to finish that, and you just kind of see this sudden shift in this arc?
Yeah.
Which I still think is a pretty cool idea, but part of what I think is so interesting about video games in general is sort of the interactive relationship that people have with them. Like, in a way, I think I would like to see that somehow relate to the movies as well. And something that's so fascinating about Zelda is the mythology is very confusing, deliberately so. It has at least 3 different timelines, and whenever a new game comes out, part of the charm is not really knowing where it fits in with the timeline. Exactly, yeah, because they more or less all tell a lot like the same story, but they're different incarnations of the same characters. So it's got this weird religiosity to it. So if you were to make a Zelda movie, my thought would be just make a new original story, and then the fans can try and decide where it fits into the timeline. I think that would be a neat way to do it. But yeah, long story short, I would I would still be interested in seeing Zelda attempted as a live action or even an animation movie. Like Studio Ghibli can do this. Like it's totally in their wheelhouse.
I would love to see it just because the mythology and the lore is so rich and Link is such a compelling character that I think there's so much to mine out of something like Zelda. It's almost astonishing that we haven't seen it in any sort of major way.
I know why. It's because it's the same reason why we haven't seen a Mario Brothers movie in so long. The creators of these games, as well as Nintendo,
very protective.
They're very protective, and they have every right to be. And to be honest, Zelda is kind of a tricky one to do. You mentioned Link being a very compelling character. What makes him so compelling is the fact that he's not really that compelling at all. He's kind of a blank slate. He doesn't even speak in these games. So there's going to be this fight from fans to remain loyal to that ethos of the character. So it makes me think, like, do you make the character silent in the movie if you were to adapt it? Like, can you actually pull that off? So there's a trickiness to The Legend of Zelda that I can see someone having a hard time with.
Well, to, I guess, clarify my comments a little bit, what I find so compelling is how he connects to that mythos and lore.
Fair.
And the aesthetics of the character. Because you're right, there's not much to him in terms of characterization, but that's why I wanted to use the phrase, there's so much to mine out of it still.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We don't really know about much about him beyond that connection to the lore. And so, there's a ton of untapped potential there that could be fascinating. I don't know if there's a way to do it where you keep him vague and broad and ambiguous. I don't know if that
I think
would
there's
work.
A way. I don't know what that way is, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's always an answer to a certain problem. There really is.
That could be the case. I will also say this: if they want to completely manufacture the character from scratch, and while still keeping that connection to the lore and the mythos the same, but you make, you bring some humanity to him that we've never experienced in the games. If you want to make that up, and again, coming down to execution, you make it interesting and compelling. I'm not against that. But if you also want to try to figure out the ambiguity, I mean, I'm not against that either. But I would absolutely be down to see a Zelda game, or a Zelda film. Yeah. But it also might come down to, again, who is doing this?
Exactly.
Because as we just talked about with Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder isn't the one that's going to fancy me when it comes to science fiction, based off of what I saw with Rebel Moon.
Yeah.
That trailer, I mean, it's stealing. It's thievery. It's flat out thievery. So I don't want a Zack Snyder doing A Legend of Zelda. Does that make sense?
It might depend
on the.
You're right. It depends on the who, and the what, funding it, right? So that's a big question that needs to be answered.
So here's another one that I thought of when trying to figure out some new games to bring to this conversation, because we talked about The Last of Us, we talked about Zelda the last time around. One game that we did not mention, and honestly, I'm not sure when it came out. This might have come out after the fact. I really have no idea.
Okay.
But the game is Horizon Zero Dawn, developed by Guerrilla Games, published by Sony Interactive Entertainment.
I haven't played this one.
I haven't played this one either, but I think it's really fascinating and has a lot of potential for a few reasons. The story is set in post-apocalyptic United States in the 31st century. It equally has some really interesting lore that I think would be appealing on the big screen. It has some interesting science fiction to it with these deadly robotic machines at play. But there's also a primitive component to it as well, as there are these 4 sections, these 4 tribes, if you will, that make up this post-apocalyptic setting in the United States, and all of them have their own various distinctions. So that duality of sci-fi deadly robots and also primitive living, I think, is a fascinating duality and dichotomy there. And then you have the central protagonist of Alloy. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but
okay,
she's this mysterious, fiercely independent female character who goes on this coming of age journey. And of course she's also a queer character as well. I think that would make it, something very new for this genre of movie. And what I thought about as far as cinema goes, I think this could be like this decade, assuming that it would come out in the 2020s here. I think it could be this decade's Hunger Games. Because the Hunger Games also has this rustic, primitive element with the depictions of the districts, right? But there's also the futuristic that comes with the Capitol. And then we have Katniss being our hero of those movies. So there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between Katniss and Alloy and how we follow them through this journey of finding themselves. Now, I think there's still so much different about the game from what I've been reading that it would not be a Hunger Games regurgitation, but fundamentally like broad talking points. You have that same kind of dichotomy of primitive and futuristic setting and a central female protagonist kind of carrying the weight of the drama and emotion.
Right.
So it's something that the studios can use as a blueprint. Hey, remember when the Hunger Games were huge in the 2010s? Let's maybe use that as a blueprint, but for this adaptation of Horizon Zero Dawn, which has garnered a lot of praise for its story, for its character, for its world building. I've never played the game. I know there's been a lot of talk about it. I know it's received a lot of acclaim. But it sounds to me so fascinating. And maybe it's because I love the Hunger Games so much that when I was doing some research and reading through this, I kept thinking of the Hunger Games, that duality, Katniss. There's a lot of similarities there, but also it's very different. Like ultimately it's very different in terms of the world building and what it's aiming to do thematically. So I that was something that came to mind that I think would be fascinating on the big screen.
Yeah, admittedly, I'm very ignorant to this one. Like I said, I haven't played it. I know of its reputation. I know vaguely some of those narrative beats that you're talking about, but other than that, I'm very unfamiliar with most of it. But I have heard great things about the game. So to hear what you're saying there as far as the cinematics of it, I guess, could certainly be translatable. But I didn't think about that one because, like I said, I just don't know enough about it.
Sure.
So going back to my list that I talked about back in 2016. So yes, we both had The Legend of Zelda at number 1. I do at least want to go through the other 2 films I had in my top 3.
Okay.
Now, one of them I'm just going to mention now because some people might be thinking about it, and that's Kingdom Hearts. That is nowhere near my list right now. I'll tell you that. Just given the whole Disneyfication of everything, that's kind of the last property I want to see now.
A lot's changed since 2016.
A lot has changed, and to be fair, like that is a game that I don't think could be done as a movie. There's just too much there. If Disney maybe wanted to do that as like a series where each episode is dedicated to a certain Disney property, I can sort of see that working a little bit more, but maybe not as a movie. And because we're a movie podcast, we're talking about movies specifically.
Yes.
Let's focus on that. At my number 3, I had a very, I guess, relatively unknown game. It was pretty popular at the time. It was called The Last Express. It was one of those, like, my dad used to call them point and click mystery games, where it was like from the perspective of the actual main character. You'd sometimes see like a little hand or finger pointing where to go, and you had to solve puzzles. Most of them, I think, were distributed by, or maybe not distributed, but they were published by Bruderbund, I think it was called. The Last Express was one that I know was a pretty commercial disappointment, but I thought it was a really fun game with a lot of narrative potential, basically taking place on the Orient Express, and became a murder mystery in its very own unique way. But I think there's a lot of untapped potential in the world of those first-person puzzle-solving games that had immense world building, very dense and complicated narratives. Another one I was going to mention here, and this is the one I wanted to focus on. Have you ever heard of Myst? Myst.
I don't think so.
So it was first developed in what year was this? It looks like it was first developed in 1993. Again, from Bruderbund, and was developed by Scion, by the Miller brothers. And it became the best-selling PC game of all time until The Sims came out in 2002.
Wow, that was a long time.
And more or less, now this is one that would be very difficult to adapt because it's really just one character wandering around solving puzzles in an unknown land. But it became a franchise. There are apparently at least 5 or 6 of these games. And remember the days of PC games when they were so big and dense that they sometimes had like 2 discs? You buy like the box from Best Buy or GameStop, and it'd be 2 discs. The sequel to Myst, which was called Riven, was 5 discs. Like that's how dense these games were. But
put in disc 3 to continue.
That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. But Myst, I thought, was always one of the most fascinating puzzle-solving, clue-based mystery games with this fantasy backdrop that is so... There's so much untapped potential there. It would be very tricky to do in a similar way to how Zelda is, because you kind of have to treat the main character as kind of an unnamed thing if you want to be faithful to it.
Yep.
But Myst is something that I've always loved, and I've always thought about, like, if we're adapting all these video games into movies or even television shows, should we not be forgetting about these PC games that may or may not be classics? You know, and Myst is one that I think is, I mean, like I said, it was the highest PC selling game up until The Sims came out. So there was popularity there at the time, at least in the 90s. But I always thought there was untapped potential there. I think it's a fascinating story.
That is really interesting. I had never really heard of it, but that is, I'm certainly not against it. That is pretty funny.
Look it up. It has a really fascinating setting. It really does.
Okay. Well, so another one that I wanted to bring up here, and this is interesting because in hindsight, if we were to look into the future and let's say we're 5 years down the road and we look back at this episode, this next game I'm about to bring up, could this be the Last of Us for this episode? And what I just
which is the most predictive pick?
Well, and also my response to it, right? Because I was so excited for The Last of Us. Of the 3 films on my list when we did that episode, that was probably the one I was the most passionate about, but also the one I was most ignorant about, which is why it was my number 3. Yeah. The other 2 films I was very familiar with.
The other 2 games,
some connection to the other 2 games. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I'm with you. We have this habit of saying films all the time.
I know, all the time. I know. It's hard to break that.
Yeah.
But yes, the other 2 games, my number 1 and number 2, Mass Effect. Yeah, I think it was Mass Effect.
Yeah.
And Zelda, I had some connection to. I have experienced those worlds. The Last of Us, I had never played before, as I mentioned earlier, but it seemed like a JD story that I would love, so I had to talk about it. This next game I'm about to bring up is more or less the same thing. Okay. Now, this is a game that had existed, but in 2018, so at the time when we did that list in 2016, this reboot hadn't launched yet, but in 2018, they rebooted God of War. Developed by Santa Monica Studio, published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. Now, you want to talk about acclaim. This game garnered incredible acclaim. It's widely regarded as one of the best video game narratives of all time. And I was reading through some of the reviews for this earlier, and people were absolutely raving about it. And it's interesting because on its face, it is this huge action adventure epic revolving around Norse mythology. That alone has me excited. I've never had time to actually play the game, but if you're talking about a film adaptation of it, yes, that alone will pique my interest. However, when you dig a little bit deeper, when I was reading about this, it is there's a more intimate story here of a father-son relationship coupled with a father who delivers his wife's ashes to her final resting place. Oh boy. Like that alone. Oh, you've got me hooked. You got me hooked. Epic story revolving around Norse mythology. Oh, and also it's this intimate love story between a father and son reconnecting while the father delivers his wife's ashes to her final resting place. It just happens to be, the God of War.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh my gosh, that is absolutely fascinating. Yeah, say no more. Make the movie. I will be there opening night. Like, I was reading this and I'm like, this is exactly how I felt when doing research for The Last of Us. On paper, this sounds exactly like something that I would love. Mm-hmm. And then even outside the narrative, the game received a ton of praise for its art direction, camera work, graphics, the music, the characters, the overall craftsmanship of it all. It just feels like it's ripe to be on the big screen, and the potential emotion that could come with something like this. I was elated. I was like, man, make this tomorrow. I want to see this on the big screen as soon as possible, please. And thank you.
I figured this was going to come up. And I in my research, looking up other articles, whether it be from Screen Rant or BuzzFeed or whoever, even Collider, looking up this exact same topic of video games that they feel should be adapted into movies, God of War was on all of them. It was on all of them. And I
had never played it. Honestly, I didn't really know much. I was aware of the game. You see the marketing for it everywhere. So I knew that it existed, but I didn't know that this was what it was about. Like, I didn't know that
it's an incredible story. Yeah. And again, I haven't played the game either, but again, I'm familiar with the mythology enough to know that I would like to see something cinematic pulled from this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all games are inherently cinematic in their own way, but as far as movie cinematic is concerned, I could see the adaptability there and doing something really fun and creative with it. But there is a density to it for sure. It could fall into the Warcraft category. So I don't know.
You never know.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Look, I had never played Warcraft either, and maybe ultimately that's what it would be in execution, even though I liked Warcraft a lot more than a lot of others did.
It was at least doing something interesting. It wasn't always successful, but I mean, again, we talk about this a lot, JD, right? We'd rather see daring failures than safe mediocrity, and much of Warcraft was not a safe movie. So I'll give it that.
What if Robert Eggers did God of War? Can we make that happen?
I feel like he kind of already did, but
sort of did, yeah.
Yeah, just make it official. Yeah, just take whatever he did with the Northmen and God of Warify it.
There's a father-son dynamic already at play. There's, of course, the Norse mythology. He's halfway there. Just let him,
or if you're not going to bring
that world,
if you're not going to bring Kenneth Branagh back to make Thor 5, just have him do God of War then.
Yeah. Or you could do that. Sure.
Yeah, I think I'd rather see Robert Eggers though. I think that certainly fits the bill.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at our original 2016 list, just making sure I don't want to mention too many similarities that were maybe called out on that episode, but going through some of the honorable mentions, I think it was either me or maybe it was our guest Natasha who brought up the Nintendo property Metroid. I think that's another one that would be very interesting to see done in a cinematic way, but again, it's kind of tricky in the same Zelda ways, because the main character, in this case, Samus Aran, a bounty hunter who more or less doesn't speak. She's kind of a silent character and is mostly alone fighting space pirates and these jellyfish-like creatures that are called Metroids. So there's a sense of literal isolation to it. You'd almost have to make it like a glorified silent film in some ways. And I think that would be very artful and very interesting. Not a marketable choice, but one that I would like to see. And I have played a few of the Metroid games. I've most specifically invested my time in Metroid Prime, as well as Metroid Primes 2 and 3 that were on Nintendo GameCube, as well as what followed after that. So I've always liked this story. I always loved the character after playing Super Smash Brothers for the first time on N64, and Samus was one of the playable characters there. But there's a lot of potential there, I think. Now, a lot of it is certainly riffing on whether it be Star Wars or Alien. If I just read the story synopsis, you'd think that is so Star Wars. So it's so ironic that we're getting off the cuff talking about Rebel Moon. But I mean, like the backdrop of Metroid references, the Galactic Federation. Apparently there's something even named Ridley in it, as if to say Ridley Scott is involved here. It's like, it's certainly wearing its influences on its sleeve, but I think there's a real inventiveness to the world building that I would love to see on the big screen. And that's something I tend to gravitate towards as to what my criteria is here is the inventive nature of the world building, and how elaborate that it is, and whether that can be transferable to the medium of film or television. And I think Metroid can. I think that'd be a very, very thrilling one for sure.
If this conversation has taught me anything, it's that Brendan has not played video games since 1997.
That's more or less exactly what this is. I'm not much of a gamer nowadays. I play music. I read sci-fi books. I watch movies.
That is so funny because like every one of his
I go to the gym. That's what I do. I don't play video games as much anymore.
No, that's very fair. I mean, I don't play video games in the sense of what I think will translate to the big screen, as we've been talking about, because every list that you could bring up, and you mentioned that there are plenty of lists out there on Collider and Variety, you name it. There's a list out there for video games that we'd want to see translated to the big screen. And there are a lot of these, you know, like a lot of the story cinematic games that we get today. Like another one I saw a lot of was Red Dead Redemption 2.
That was on my list. That was. I haven't played those games, but I've seen enough people play them, and I mean, can see that really working in film form.
There's a mode in that game just simply called cinematic mode. I mean, if that isn't begging to be on the big screen, I don't know what is. You know what I mean? So
that's a great point. That's a really great point.
I would love to see that as well. You know, so like, I mean, a lot of these narrative cinematic games, you know, over the last 20 years, I simply haven't had a whole lot of time for. That doesn't mean I wouldn't be interested in seeing them. I think that's part of the fun of having this conversation and doing the research. That was what I loved so much about doing this exercise with Warcraft back in 2016, was getting to look at these games I've never played before, seeing which ones that I think would be fun to see on the big screen, having no experience with them whatsoever. You know, Mass Effect is one that I've had some experience with, but I haven't played it enough where I'm deeply familiar with it. That's one where if I saw that in film adaptation, a lot of it would be new to me, even if I was broadly aware of what was happening. Right. You know, and some of these we've talked about: Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, Red Dead Redemption, you know, you name it. I simply haven't played a lot of these games, but I think it would be fun to see. I would love to experience them on the big screen. There's certainly a lot of potential there. Or even with something that I am familiar with, but I haven't played for the same reasons. Something like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order or Knights of the Old Republic. I never played either of those games, but those are stories within the Star Wars canon that I think could be extremely effective in the right hands. You know, especially Knights of the Old Republic. That's an era that we've been begging for years. Yeah. And, you know, will we ever get there? I don't know. I don't know either. Ahsoka is certainly teasing that era. Yeah. So it could be something that's coming down the pipeline in the nearish future. Who knows? I don't know. But, you know, or something like, and this is something that I have played a little bit because, again, our Patreon listeners will know this. I've been in a Harry Potter kick all year. And if you want to hear me talk about Harry Potter, please subscribe to Patreon. But I that Hogwarts Legacy game came out, I think, earlier in the year. And that is one that I have played a little bit. And I mean, I'm always down for more Wizarding World. And there's some interesting preludes, like if that was going to be a prequel, because that is set in like the early 1900s, right? So you know, it's before Dumbledore's time, obviously long before Harry Potter, and in fact the headmaster at Hogwarts is in the family bloodline of Sirius Black, and the character is actually referenced in Order of the Phoenix movie, which I wouldn't have made that connection until I recently rewatched Order of the Phoenix, and I was like, oh my god, that's the character in the video game that he's talking about. Yeah. So like, there's some interesting little Easter eggs like that that can make for an interesting prequel kind of movie. That's not Fantastic Beasts.
Fantastic Beasts. I was just going to say, like Harry Potter and prequel world. Yeah, it's kind of, those are two words that kind of create a sour taste in your mouth, doesn't it?
Yeah. Look, Fantastic Beasts could have been, like, I think the ideas on paper are good. It just wasn't there in execution.
It was just such a corporately mandated product written by. We talked about J.K. Rowling being a great writer in novel form, but that doesn't necessarily mean novelists are great screenwriters. And that was certainly the case with the Fantastic Beasts movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is to say, like, Hogwarts Legacy, the main narrative, I think there's potential there. It certainly introduces things that you don't really experience in the Harry Potter movies. And so I think there's a way for it to be familiar, but also be distinctive simultaneously. So that's something that you could do. Or again, as far as narrative, storytelling goes, and this is a little nostalgic because this came out when I was in college, so I was able to play this a little bit. Was the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare games.
Right.
And narratively speaking, I like that would be derivative today. And
I think it's kind of lost its time. Yeah,
absolutely. I will say this, like the Modern Warfare trilogy, you'd have to rewrite the story, and certainly make it more modern and work around the derivative nature of the action and the plot. So you'd have to completely reboot it in that way. But the characters of that game, so Soap McTavish and Captain Price, Ghost, like those are fascinating characters that I think could translate on screen in film form.
Sure.
So you can keep those characters. They're a lot of fun. Just rewrite the plotting and the action and make it more modern and less problematic, less racist. And and so you'd have to rework it in that way, but the characters are absolutely captivating and I think would work well on screen, and I think there's enough nostalgia there that you'd be able to tap into an audience and get them to the theaters as well. So.
Speaking of characters from video games that we could easily see in film form, apparently is already in the works, is Metal Gear Solid. Solid Snake.
Yeah, that's another one I saw on a bunch of lists.
Yeah, and apparently this is being worked up by director Jordan Vogt Roberts. Which we mostly remember as the director of, what was it, The Kings of Summer, and then it was obviously Kong Skull Island.
Okay,
and if I'm not mistaken, it's Oscar Isaac who is tapped to play Solid Snake, which is...
Say no more.
Well, it's like, it's so perfect of a choice that it's like, is it a derivative choice at this point? But I'm sure he would do a great job with it. It's like, it's almost too perfect casting. So I think this is already in the works, if I'm not mistaken. But I do think this is another one that we could certainly add to the list of ones that would make sense to adapt.
No more. I'd be there. Remember when Tom Hardy was cast as the lead character for the Splinter Cell movie?
Yes.
That was like a decade ago.
Yes, but that's another one that I think we should also add to this list. Splinter Cell is
whatever happened. I'd never even heard what happened to that.
I don't know.
I'd have to look it up. But I remember the casting because this was post Warrior. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love Tom Hardy. He's amazing.
Yeah.
This will be great. And then that movie just never happened.
Nope, did not happen.
No idea. But hopefully this project you're talking about with Oscar Isaac will still keep going. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. I have no idea what's going to happen there. I don't even think there's a date or anything for it yet. It's just all like still in production. So that's all I know about it at this point.
Yeah. And here's another thing too. I did not look into any of this. So when it comes to Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, Red Dead, as far as I know, these movies may be in production for an Amazon series or something. I really have no idea.
Yeah.
That certainly could be, the case. There could be listeners or viewers on YouTube watching this going, "You guys are idiots. These things are already happening." And
yeah, like, we have to acknowledge that
we
we might be a little bit behind the curve on this one.
That's perfectly, that might be the case. I don't really know. I'm just speaking to video games that we have not seen in film form, and this being a film podcast, that's my emphasis here, as Brendan noted earlier. And we haven't had these in film form.
Right.
And when I was reading through Horizon Zero Dawn, that could absolutely be the Hunger Games. You can make that this decade's version of those movies if you do it right, which is a big if. The studios haven't necessarily proven themselves to be trustworthy these days. But if you do it right, I think there's potential there to tap into that same audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's potential for all these. But like you said, you got to do it right, and you can't just make it a cash grab. I think we're going to see quite a few more coming from Illumination after the success of the Super Mario Brothers, and I think most of them will be Nintendo properties, which does worry me. I don't want to see Illumination making Zelda like we talked about. I don't want to see them making Metroid. If anything, if they want to make another property, make Star Fox.
Star Fox will be fun.
I mean, basically, it'll be Illumination's version of Guardians of the Galaxy. It's basically what it'll be. And it sort of fits that tonality already. So I could see that one at least.
But that's an interesting thing, because you've brought up a lot of these nostalgic 90s, late 80s properties.
I think these are the ones to focus on.
Well, I bring that up to say today, like, are we past the opportunity where those films are viable? Like, is there an audience there? Because, for example, my son, who does play video games, he wouldn't be aware of something like Star Fox, for example, or even Zelda. I don't even know if he knows Zelda.
I mean,
Super Mario Brothers has transcended to a completely different stratosphere, right? Like they're on a god tier level in terms of awareness.
I would argue Zelda is in that same category, because we've had 2 Zelda games over the past few years, one of them coming out this year, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that are being hailed as perhaps the 2 greatest Zelda games of all time. So it's still very top of mind.
I mean, look, my household may be a singular outlier in all of that. I'm certainly willing to admit that, because we don't play Zelda.
Do you have a Nintendo console?
No, we have PlayStation and Xbox, and we play both. He plays both.
And most of these properties, like Zelda, for instance, they're Nintendo exclusives, so you can only play it on those systems.
So he has a Nintendo Switch, but the one game he has is Super Mario Kart. So, like, like Mario, I think is such a different animal. Zelda might be close. Again, my household might not be indicative of what reality is. I don't know. But I just wonder about other properties, especially 90s, 80s properties, video games.
I would say,
is the younger audience there? I don't know. Or is it a nostalgic getting us to the theater to see them?
Well, and I think that's where you got to pick and choose to try and find who the right audience is, right?
Yeah.
You're definitely right that I think Mario is probably the most it's the most universal of all of these Nintendo properties, at least, that certainly had their fair share of popularity from the 80s and 90s. Mario definitely exists very heavily, and maybe even Sonic the Hedgehog kind of exists in that same world too.
Well, and that's a good point, because Sonic just had their 2 movies, and Sam loved them both, and I don't think he's played those games at all. So I don't know. That might be a good point, actually.
But Zelda definitely is more of a specific audience, and not like age demographic wise. It's a different type of game, especially these new Zelda games. It takes patience. A lot of times it's just very open world. So it's a very different type of playability. And that's not to say Sam would like it or even not like it. It's a very different mindset. It's not as, it's not as quick. So it has a very particular audience for that game type.
I mean, if they're going to tap into a market that is extreme right now, we joke about it, but it would be Fortnite. Like, I don't know how you turn Fortnite into a movie.
I don't know.
My God, that game is so extremely prevalent at the moment. It is so big.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know how you turn that into a movie, but the amount of content that there is right now for Fortnite, and it's so huge that would be a way to tap into the youths, as they say.
The use.
The use.
Nice.
So, just throwing that out there as well. Any other video games you want to mention here?
I'm trying to think. I'm looking back at my list of ones that I referenced during our 2016 episode, and apparently I went
the
all
Oregon
the way.
Trail.
I was just gonna say the Oregon Trail. That's actually not a bad one.
So it is something I mentioned as, because I wanted to have that on my list the last time we did this, but at the time we were actually just a few years removed from Meek's Cutoff, the Kelly Reichardt film, and Meek's Cutoff is essentially the Oregon Trail with a different name, but that's what that is. Yeah. And at the time we were just a few years removed, so I was like, I don't know if we need an Oregon Trail movie right now. However, we're now 12 years removed from that film. To have another Oregon Trail-esque movie, sure. I think the time is right now.
All I know is that whenever I see a potential future Oregon Trail movie, I'm just going to think about how great Meek's Cutoff was.
I know. I will always go back to that. Meek's Cutoff will be the quintessential version of that game. There's no doubt about it.
At times, I think it is my favorite Kelly Reichardt film. It's at least top
good.
3 for me.
Yeah, no, it's great.
It's between that, First Cow, and Wendy and Lucy. I think those are her 3 masterpieces.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
But as far as other video games, looking at this list, I'm actually kind of surprised we never saw any attempt at Grand Theft Auto. I feel like there was a lot of untapped potential there for sure.
Especially with Fast and the Furious. I know it's different, but I feel like the same audience would cross over there.
Yeah.
And they've never even attempted that at all, as far as I know anyway. Right?
I wonder why.
Maybe they did try in pre-production and it just didn't get anywhere. I don't know. But
I don't know. I wonder why, but maybe our listeners might know some of the history as to why it never came into fruition.
Yeah. At any rate, I would love to know what our listeners are thinking here.
Yes.
If they agree or disagree with anything we had to say, let us know what video games we missed out on that we should have talked about.
There are a lot. We know there are a lot.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. As we wind down here, it is also David Fincher's birthday. Happy birthday, Mr. Fincher.
Mr. Finch.
There was a new poster released today for his new film coming out this fall. Hopefully it still comes out. It is called The Killer. Any thoughts on the poster for The Killer?
I mean, gets me excited for the movie, so the poster does what it needs to do. Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Weirdly, the thing that I'm most excited for with this movie is that, yes, I'm excited to see David Fincher make a movie again. I'm also excited to see him work with Michael Fassbender.
Yes.
But the screenwriter, Andrew Kevin Walker, last time they worked together, they being Walker and Fincher, was Seven.
Okay.
So, I does this mean we're getting a more, I guess, for lack of a better term, disgusting Fincher film, violently depraved film? Which, to be fair, like some of his recent films have still been that in their own way. He basically makes art house trash, as many people call it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure The Killer will still fall into that same category, but for the last couple of years, he's mostly been adapting what many people call airport novels, right? Like Gone Girl, for instance, or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And he did that for a while. Is it maybe time to go back to basics a little bit? I'm not saying he needs to, but that's a nice, interesting change of pace if that's what he's choosing to do.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. The synopsis here by Netflix says, after a fateful near miss, an assassin battles his employers and himself on an international manhunt he insists isn't personal. I mean, that sounds pretty Fincher to me.
Well, I mean, this basically sounds like David Fincher doing Taken.
a little bit like I read that as a little bit of both. Like it's drama, intense Fincher, but also a little bit of the airport novel thing.
It's
like,
yeah.
I think that insists a little bit of both.
I mean, we know
whenever
David Fincher tries his hand at a certain genre, I think he's going to do a very good job with it, because this very much sounds like another one of those insert famous actor with a gun kind of movies. But weirdly, I think Fincher's the perfect director to try that. I could see him doing something really neat with it.
I agree. And as you noted, Fassbender, I'm so happy that he's back. We really haven't seen him do much over these last few years. I know he has the Waititi film that's supposedly coming out. I think that is premiering at Venice.
I think it is Venice.
One of the festivals we're getting
next goal wins.
September.
You're right.
So we're getting that and The Killer. We're getting 2 Fassbenders this year. Unbelievable.
Wow.
So happy that he's back.
We're fast-bending this year.
We're fast-bending. It's about damn time.
His last movie
was
Dark Phoenix.
Yeah.
And before that was The Snowman.
Yeah.
And before that was Alien Covenant.
Yeah, look, my man's been on a little bit of he needs a pick-me-up. Like there's probably a reason he went away for a few years. He was downtrodden. Been making these bad movies. I
will say I'm warming up to Alien Covenant as time goes on. I really am. I think it was rewatching Prometheus and me liking that movie even less made me realize, I think I'm liking Covenant more. It's
fair.
I'll just say that. I'll say that.
I can't get behind it. I can't get behind it as much as I love Ridley. I just can't get behind those movies and how uneven they are.
I gave it a different perspective that the movie is just this mean-spirited, ugly thing, and I started to appreciate it more.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you certainly embrace its bleakness and its mean-spirited ethos, then maybe there's something to appreciate. But
because I think that's what
so contrived.
Well, I think that's what Prometheus was.
Execution.
I think that's what Prometheus was trying to do and fails. Like this very cynical representation of humanity, and I think Covenant. I think it certainly succeeds at that more than Prometheus. I'll simply say.
Yeah, I think in both iterations, I think Ridley Scott either needed to commit to the philosophizing or commit to being a trashy sci-fi film and not try to do both. To me, I think that's why those films falter, both of them. Yeah, not a huge fan, but that is to say, Fassbender.
He's a good actor.
He's coming back.
He's a good actor.
At any rate, I think that'll do it for this week's show.
Woo!
Man, we went through a lot there.
We did.
Big thank you to our patrons. Again, if you want to support us, patreon.com/InSession Film. This week's Patreon exclusive is the longest one we've done yet. It was a lot of fun, though.
I think the timestamp was like 45 minutes or something like that.
It was a lot of fun. We talked a little bit of Ahsoka. We went a little deeper into our announcement on our 2001 retrospective that we're going to do next month. Of course, we talked some Harry Potter book.
Yeah.
And, it was a great time. So please go and check that out. Again, that's patreon.com/InSession Film. Thank you to all of our patrons. Podcast reviews. Let's see. We have a review for Blue Beetle that we did last week with Rosa Parra. It's up. Please go and check it out. This last week, I got to do a review of Passages, the Ira Sachs film.
Yeah.
And Josh Parham from Next Best Picture joined me for that. We had a great time talking about that movie. Brendan, I am so excited for you to see this movie.
Wow.
I cannot
That
wait
means something when you say
thoughts.
it like that. That's really meaning something.
Cannot wait to hear your thoughts. I talked about this in the review, but it's the first time we've seen Adele Exarchopoulos in a prevalent way. Since then, she hasn't done much. She's done a few French films, but they haven't really made their way to the United States. I've heard she's been good in them, but
I'm not surprised.
Haven't really been able to get our hands on them. Like in the first 4 or 5 years after Blue, she did some supporting roles, and I did get to see her in a few of those, like The White Crow. I don't know if you remember that one.
I do remember
Jailbird.
that. Yeah.
I
remember those names.
She had these small supporting roles in those movies. But I think it's fair to say, especially this being an Ira Sachs film, and this is the most accessible film of hers we've had since Blue is the Warmest Color. And she's a prevalent character. She's one of the main characters.
Yeah.
And it also stars Franz Rogowski, one of the best actors on the planet right now. Seeing them together, such a treat. And Ben Whishaw, oh my gosh, incredible.
Wow, what a cast. What a cast.
Josh and I had a great time talking about that movie. I'll just say that. So please go and check it out. I'm so fascinated to hear your thoughts on it as well, Brendan. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we will have a review for Gran Turismo coming out very soon. By the time you're listening to this, it might already be out. So definitely go and check that out or be on the lookout for it. If it's not dropped, it will be very, very soon. On our latest Women in Session, our very own MN Miller joined Kristen Battistella to talk about Christopher Nolan's Memento. Speaking of 2001, a fun little tie-in there. So go and check that out. That was a really great time. Be sure to follow us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Google Plus. I'm just kidding about that last one. But we're everywhere. Go and check us out. Email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. Leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, leave a comment, all that fun jazz. Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here, my friend?
Well, if we want to provide one more incentive once again for all of our listeners out there to become patrons at patreon.com/InSessionFilm, we talked about gearing up for our 2001 retrospective, maybe giving some homework updates on some of the weeks leading up to that retrospective, which we did a little bit of on our latest Patreon content. And honestly, that was a lot of fun.
It was fun.
It, because obviously we're more condensed for time with this new format. So when we get to that actual retrospective, there's not going to be as much room to be bouncing off from film to film like we normally do. We don't have the 2.5 hour time frame as much anymore. So it's going to make those Patreon catch-ups, if you will, kind of crucial. So just throwing that out there. If you want to become a patron, get exclusive content. That's something we're going to be doing there.
Absolutely. We'll be talking more about that. I'll be raving more about my Harry Potter experience. But I mean, it's a really nice place for us to talk about our progress as we kind of go through this homework. So and a bunch of other fun conversations. So again, patreon.com/InSessionFilm, sign up. You can sign up for as low as $1 a month, and you get access to all this bonus content. So and it really helps out the show. We really do appreciate everyone that is helping us out over there.
Absolutely.
With all of that said, we hope you enjoyed the episode as we veer into September and the fall season begins, and also college football. I am so excited for that as well. It's that time of year, Brennan. I'm ready to be done with summer.
We're getting
I'm
close.
ready to be done.
Getting close. Oof.
Absolutely. At any rate, thanks
the Big
for
18
listening.
coming at it.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We will see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man.
Yeah. We got to play more video games, man.
I know, right?